I would start with that Muslim guy. If you would like to give an introduction, before that, I would introduce myself. My name is Akriti, and I'm currently freelancing with Core Middle East, and I work in Germany as a digital producer, and I work as a journalist for TV and for social media for about 5 years. And I have gone from all fields, from music to entertainment to 24/7 news. And now I'm currently working with cars. So I'm all over the place here and there, and I like to put my hands everywhere. And the reason to host this panel was because I have been following whatever is happening in Israel and Palestine. And especially, I covered whatever happened in May when the attacks happened in Gaza. So I would not want to miss out the opportunity on hearing you guys who are very closely involved with this situation. So that Muslim guy, if that's what you want me to call you, or Mohammed.
So thank you very much for inviting us all here and having everyone to discuss this very important topic. So I really appreciate you reaching out and the invite. And just as a quick summary, my name is Mohammed. I go as that Muslim guy on social media. Quick summary about myself is I'm an accountant by day, which is funny to some people apparently. And I am an activist and YouTuber / social media at night. And what I do for the most part is I educate people about Islam and politics using comedy, because I really believe in the power of comedy. And if people are willing to laugh, then they're willing to learn, especially when it comes to very sensitive topics, very taboo topics, or large stereotypes and misconceptions. And that is what I do on social media, on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jane, would you like to go next?
Sure, absolutely. And I would second what Mohammed said, and just thank you for having us here to talk about this topic, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I am from North Bay, Ontario, Canada, and I am a high school teacher by trade. However, I have been doing more and more activism as time goes on, and in particular focusing right now on Palestinian human rights, and specifically the human rights of Palestinian prisoners. And in this moment, in particular, those who are on hunger strike to protest their administrative detention, which is a policy used that's essentially imprisonment with no trial and no charges for extended periods of time. And so that's just what I've been engaging in right now. That's my passion. My passion is human rights. And I've just felt really inspired to be more outspoken about it in recent times. And so that's just been the focus of what I've been doing. I also try to, like Mohammed said, add some educational element in there, particularly for people who may not understand the topic very well, coming from my communities or my friends and family. So I try to mix some educational opportunities for people as well, and just share information, but then also have actions that people can take if they want to get involved.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was lovely. And Mansoor?
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. And it was nice to see you people here. My name is Muhammad Mansoor, and I'm from Hyderabad city, from India. And I am the convener for the movement Direct Zakat. Direct Zakat movement actually it works for the poor people, and we create awareness among the people regarding the charity. I think you might be aware of Zakat. So we work mostly on the charity work, and we also educate people to give charity to the poor people and reach them directly without any middlemen. And we also, I'm also the founder member of Team NGOs, which is an umbrella organization for more than 160 NGOs from all over India. And we are also into different diversified activities, social activities, basically. And also like my business, I'm an IT guy. Actually, I work for an IT company, Farish Technologies. I'm the CEO and founder of that company. So this is all about me.
Thank you so much. Focus of today's panel would be about the prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, and with a slight focus on the hunger strike. My first question out there would be that prisoners have been suffering for many, many years, I would say, but there is a sudden focus that has come on it right now, like let's say the past few months and the last few days when, of course, the hunger strike, the number of days of the hunger strike have increased. What would your personal relation towards this topic would be, and why do you think that suddenly it is so important?
Since this has been happening since, well, before 1948, but since 1947, 1948, when Israel established itself, whereby it caused a mass exodus, ethnic cleansing of Palestine of over 700,000 Palestinians. And up to today, there's over 5 million Palestinians who cannot go back home, even though according to international law, they have the right to return. Yeah. Since then, hundreds, if not thousands of villages and towns were just taken down, completely bulldozed to the ground, and Israel was set up. Israel has been detaining and kidnapping children. So the only reason this has been going viral now and everyone's starting to hear about administrative detention and hunger strikes and all these human rights violations, from what I've noticed, is because of social media and Palestinians reclaiming the narrative and using their phone to go on Instagram Live, regardless of all the censorship that's been happening. Enough of the message has been able to come across to the world where Palestinians have been able to tell their story.
And in terms of administrative detention itself, it's actually a holdover of the British Empire's colonial policies and somehow got worked into international law. However, for example, in terms of the current hunger strikers, a number of organizations, including the UN Special Procedures Division, came out with international statements regarding this topic. And something that comes to mind from what the UN Special Rapporteurs said just a couple of days ago in their statement was that Israel's use of administrative detention is actually a breach of international law, because the way it's set up in international law is that it is the most extreme power that has been given to a government or an occupation, and it is meant to be used extremely rarely and for very short periods of time. And so according to the UN, Israel and a number of other organizations, I might add, international organizations, Israel's use of this policy is a breach of all of the treaties that Israel and countries like Canada and dozens of other countries have signed. So I think that's also an important thing for people to understand, is that yes, this policy does exist in a very limited way in international law, and some people actually disagree on whether it exists or not legitimately as a policy. So I think that's something important to understand. The other thing that's interesting and important to understand is that, especially about prisoners, is that the military occupation has essentially criminalized any activity that basically is part of normal Palestinian life. For example, the military occupation has outlawed gatherings of 10 or more people in public, that they automatically assume that and give themselves the impunity to break up violently with military force any gathering of 10 or more people in public. So essentially, the Israeli occupation has given themselves, through military orders, the ability to arrest any Palestinian for almost any reason or no reason at all. And so that's also something that's very important for people to realize in terms of the situation with prisoners. And in terms of just Palestinian society at all, it is an extremely oppressive military occupation that they're living underneath, as well as an apartheid government and all of the policies that are part of the military occupation or apartheid policies.
When we are talking about the Palestinian prisoners, as everybody can see that the whole Palestine is itself a prison. Not just the prison inside the Israel, but the whole country. Palestine as a country is itself has become a prison for the people. Even if you are a journalist there, you don't have the rights there. Even now, just a couple of days back, what news I was telling you people, like all the human rights activist groups have been declared as terrorists. So this is unacceptable. So what happens is, like, anyone who is in Palestine, he is a prisoner. He is being treated as a prisoner. And the perspective, if you look at the global perspective, like, there is nothing called like international law or human rights. There is no human right to the Palestinian people. And also, the main reason behind the atrocities of the Israel is the backing of the US, the United States. So whenever anything, like any country or any organization comes up with, like, even in the UN, whenever there is a crime committed by the Israeli authorities, then the America comes into rescue. So the whole backing is being done from outside Israel. And some of the European countries are also involved in that. So we must also talk about that.
My second question would be that hunger strike, as we see it, has become a very, very important part. As we see that Miqdad has now had 91 plus days, and he, like they say, is almost on the way to grave. So do you think that in a situation like this, when you're in prison and you're trying to get out of it and your other choice is just death, where is this actually leading to? And of course, we know that people around the world, like Jane and I had a discussion earlier this morning, have also been doing hunger strike, like she herself. But to what extent are the prisoners who are already suffering in a prison like this have to deal with hunger strike? And till what extent is that going to be any sort of solution or come out with any positive sign to end this kind of cruelty? But I would also like to follow up with another question so that you could give an answer accordingly, which is that if you see, according to United Nations Human Rights Report of 2013, you would see that Israel's prisons actually end up meeting the requirement of the international prison system, which means that they say that it is all, like, if you're in the Israeli prison, it's not that harsh as, let's say, maybe a Guantanamo Bay or something like that. But still, we see and we hear what they are going through. So why is it that there is no international intervention here? Like, let's say UN, which is the most basic one for human rights, or any other, as a matter of fact.
If you see, when they are talking about the human rights violations inside the prison, there are hundreds of children inside the Israeli prison.
Absolutely.
As you know, that there are hundreds of children who are inside the Israeli prison without proper facilities, and they are going through a lot of problems. So you can understand the how hard it is for the kids, how dangerously they are going through the atrocities of the Israeli government. And there are many, like a few hundred people who have been serving the sentence since 20 years, and there is no change, and they are still continuing their sentence. And there are hundreds of women inside the prison, even the pregnant women. Like few days ago, we have seen the incident where a pregnant woman was beaten by the authorities inside the prison. So, they are nowhere, like, you cannot match them with the UN report. It's absolutely different from what the report we have got.
But how does my first question was that how does hunger strike, and they're already going through so much, and to have a hunger strike on top of that, 91 days, 75 days, 65 days, as you may see, like, till what extent do you think that this is actually helping or going to help the prisoners?
Hunger strike inside the Israeli prison should be it should be supported with hunger strike outside Palestine. Like, there are many human rights activists and social organizations. They can come up on the roads and they can protest, and they too can participate with the prisoners in the hunger strike. That will be like, it will be have massive effect on the different governments. So that will be better.
Okay.
I can just add another couple of points to that. And when the question is, what benefit or what good do hunger strikes do to prisoners who are already facing such harsh conditions, right? I believe that is the question.
Yeah.
And I think there are two sides to this question. The first one is, I feel like the question can be answered with the very same statement. That is, the fact that we are talking about them now and we were never talking about them before is probably because of these hunger strikes.
Hunger strikes.
So that's the first thing. These hunger strikes are causing publicity. Now, why are they using hunger strikes? For a logical human being, why, if you're already serving 20 years without even being charged for any crimes, you don't know what you're accused of, you're under administrative detention, you're already going through all this mental stress, you can't see your family, you barely get to see your lawyer, and you're in there for decades, you're already mentally and physically deteriorating. So why would you add another stress factor to that, such as a hunger strike? Well, I think what we need to ask ourselves is, why would someone do that? And I think the answer is, that tells us how harsh of these conditions are that they're in, where for Palestinian prisoners or detainees, going through a hunger strike and risking death is worth it than living another day being imprisoned by an occupier unjustly and being treated unjustly. So I think that's the very first thing we need to look at. And that when the fact is that is their last resort, that tells us that the conditions are dire and the situation is dire. The second thing I'll get to, and that is the UN study about the prisons, etc. Now, I didn't read that study and I'd like to read it, but just from listening to it, I can automatically assume they probably checked out a couple of prisons. I don't think the Jalboua prison, the Israel's maximum security prison, escaped from, I don't think that would have been on the list, because those living conditions are probably completely different. And the second thing is, I believe they would have looked at the room sizes and the procedures, but not the treatment of Palestinians. And when we listen to lawyers and family members of Palestinian prisoners, be it in the Jalboua prison or elsewhere, they talk about torture. They talk about sleep deprivation, being hung up and listen and being blasted with loud music, the way they would do in Guantanamo Bay as well. So you can be sleep deprived and mentally disoriented. Even some of the prisoners that escaped Jalboua prison and then they were recaptured, once they were finally able to talk to the lawyer, they mentioned how they were tortured, they had broken jaws, they were beaten up, abused as prisoners, treated like people without any human rights, absent of any human rights. And these are just the adults. We haven't even started talking about the children that are being kidnapped, like the Bernat brothers. I know the Palestine podcast, Lara, an international lawyer, has talked about them. She knows them, I believe she knows the family. And these are brothers, teenagers that are administratively detained as well. And when they talk to their lawyer, same thing. They mentioned they were being tortured for over 15 hours a day. And as a matter of fact, administrative detention. And the study examined 322 administrative detention cases. And the study revealed that from the 322 cases that they studied, it was decided by the Israeli Supreme Court for that 10-year period that not even one single case was resulted in a release order. None of these detainees were released. The judges just said, yep, throw them in prison on this secret evidence that we will never know about. So when Palestinians are being treated like this, absent of any human rights, being treated worse than animals, because if someone shoots a dog in the middle of the street and takes a video of it, there will be an animal rights group that will fight for them. You know, you have Palestinians and no one is saying anything, and those who are being censored. So that is probably why a hunger strike is their final option. And I'm sure Jane would have a lot more to say, as she has been in touch as well with the families of people in Palestine who are on hunger strike.
Jane, if you don't mind with your answer, would it also be possible for you to mention, because since you're closely attached with them, the conditions of the prisoners who are on the hunger strike for over 60 days plus, like Miqdad or
Sure.
Kayed? Yeah.
For sure. Well, and first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to Mohammed, well, both of them for both of their points, but for that Muslim guy, because he shared a lot of things that I would have liked to share as well. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mohammed, for sharing all of that. And his point about the fact that we need to understand that if someone is hunger striking, that tells us all we need to know. That tells us about how bad it is, how unjust it is, the level of injustice that they are experiencing, right? Because these are people that are now making a conscious choice, a conscious empowered choice to say, I am going to put my life on the line, right? This is life or death. And I'm going to do this, and I'm 100% committed to the end, because I can no longer tolerate the level of injustice that I am experiencing. And I can no longer tolerate it for my culture, for my people either. Because many of these hunger strikers, I have heard statements that they have shared through their lawyers, and they say, I'm not just doing this for myself. I'm doing this for Palestinians, because we can no longer tolerate this level of injustice. It's unacceptable. And so in terms of hunger strikers, that for many of the people on administrative detention in particular, it is their last resort, just like Mohammed said. They have no legal recourse. When their detention comes up for renewal, the judge is the one who has carte blanche, right? They look at the file and they say yes or no. And as Mohammed said, the majority of them are renewed. And again and again and again and again for 6 months, for 6 months, for 6 months. So at that point, people don't have any other legal recourse. So then they go on hunger strike because that's their last resort, right? And that indicates to us the level of injustice that people are experiencing. And then just a quick, not that I want to make it a quick point about the child prisoners, because it's an extremely important topic that is not talked about enough. And I personally think it's a disgrace that every country, it's a disgrace to humanity that every single country on earth is not talking and screaming about the issue of child prisoners, Palestinian prisoners. So there are many organizations, UNICEF is one of them, that have written very extensive reports. And I read the reports, and I can assure you it is stuff that would keep you up at night if you are a person with any kind of moral compass. They talked about mental, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, right? Widespread and systematic was the words that they used. And so if that's happening to children, we absolutely know that or worse is happening to adults, right? So I agree with Mohammed when he said probably the United Nations report was more talking about, the facility itself, like are there room sizes adequate? I highly doubt they toured every single prison, because I have seen photos and videos from inside prisons, and I looked at those photos and I was like, how do they think that this is an acceptable space even for somebody to be held in for any amount of time? I mean, the facilities are grim. The facilities are not even adequate. So I would very much challenge that report by the United Nations. I have not read it myself, but I would like to now, because I can't.
It's from 2013, just by the way, so
well,
you can go ahead.
Yeah. I can't fathom that could be accurate, that that the Israeli prisons could pass a United Nations inspection. Like I've seen videos, like CCTV videos of just what the prisons look like, let alone the treatment of the prisoners inside the prisons. I have seen, you know, one of the leaked CCTV videos of the Negev prison when they basically were throwing and kicking and beating blindfolded, shackled prisoners, and they threw them into a pile and were beating them. And it was all, and it blows my mind that there isn't an uproar everywhere when you see a video like that. Because like for me as a person who apparently has a moral compass, I look at that and I'm like, no, that is not acceptable treatment of a human being. I don't care even what that prisoner did. It doesn't matter, because there are standards, right, of how people are supposed to be treated. And that has to be upheld in every country of the world. And Israel calls itself a so-called democracy. Well, I'm sorry. If that's what you're going to call yourself, then you need to uphold even the most basic standards of human rights, which they do not do. They do not do. And I know I've spoken a lot here, and I'll very quickly talk about your last question. So Kayed Fasfus is 103 days, because it's already tomorrow in Palestine. So 103 days. Mikdad Kawazma is at 97 days, 96 days, 97 days today. Ala al-Raj is 78 or 79 days today. All three of them are in extremely imminent life-threatening condition. Ala al-Raj is not in the hospital. Hissam Abu Hawash and Shadi Abu Akr, they are both 60 plus days. Today, the occupation renewed the detention of Shadi Abu Akr. He's at 61 days. And I believe the exact wording that his lawyer used was, they did not see a legitimate reason to release him. That was their wording, right? Despite the fact, in terms of medical reports, he is on death's door, right? To be at 61 days of hunger strike is like on the edge of death, right? So for Kayed Fasfus at 103 days, I mean, really, like he has lost more than half his body weight. So, and we need to remember that these are people that are not charged with anything. They haven't had a trial. And so how can it be that there's any justification for continuing to imprison them?
What Jane was saying was, and I just found super ironic, is that the Israeli, I guess the military or the court, when it was time for release, when they said, we don't see a legitimate reason to release him. And I'm like, yeah, but you also don't have a legitimate reason to hold him either. So it's just the irony that exists within the Israeli court system. It's just all made to entrap Palestinians in this loop that's never ending. It's like the truth doesn't matter, facts aren't real, and irony is the motto. And unfortunately, that's the system Palestinians live within. There's no legitimate reason to hold them, and yet they're telling them there's no legitimate reason to free them. I just found that ironic, but that's all I wanted to say.
That's fantastic, actually. Okay, so one very important question that I think this is my personal view on it, please feel free to criticize, is something that is rarely discussed, that we already know that they are suffering a lot inside and outside, of course, within the country. But why isn't there any sort of major intervention happening from any of the other international or major organizations, especially from the West? Of course, we know that US is supporting Israel. Let's just put that out. And but still, there are a lot of other countries like Germany or UK France, who can support but do not, and probably the only organization currently who is playing any major role is Red Cross, and there is only little they can do if there is no external support. So why do you feel that? Is it that there is a veto power of the US, or what is it exactly that you feel is coming out which is stopping any major organization from putting their hand into this?
Actually, Israel is serving as a master for all the governments, all those governments who are into appeasement of the minorities. So Israel is setting up an example for them, like how to treat the prisoners, how to cool down the protests, and how to take the humanitarian, like human rights of the minorities. So almost most of the governments where there are problems of minority issues, they are Israel is actually working as a master for all, a teacher for all. So and they are all, almost all the countries, they are hand in glove. So we cannot talk about that also.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. And I think something that Mohammed said was very interesting, and it's that like Israel will test things out and then other countries will use it on their populations. So there's a joke about a dark joke about the weapons that Israel uses. So it's like funded by the states, tested on Palestinians, right? And that's unfortunately the situation. In regards to why there aren't more international or not-for-profits or organizations helping, I don't know if that's true. I would need to do a little more research into that, because I do know that there are a lot of organizations that try to help, but whether that assistance can reach or not, I think that's a completely different argument. And especially like, are they trying to help the people in the West Bank who are facing a lot of illegal settlements and being kicked out of their homes in places like East Jerusalem? Or are they trying to help Gaza, whereby they literally can't send anything in or bring anything out because Israel has a full-on siege on Gaza by land, air, and sea? So I think it also depends on which Palestinians we're talking about, the ones under siege living in the world's largest open-air prison in Gaza, or the ones being ethnically cleansed and displaced in the West Bank. So it's a little, I think it just depends on those details, but also a lot of it, we put a lot of pressure on NGOs and other charities and say, why aren't these charities doing this or that? When in reality, they have very little to no power. The power is with the governments. And the governments will do whatever they want, with or without the people. The people, on the other hand, have some power, but they have to actually be vocal and unified in their message to make politicians feel worried that if they don't do what the people want, they won't get reelected. Unfortunately, as we know, many Western nations, especially the United States, with the vetoing power in the UN, they just let Israel get away with anything and everything. And whenever you can have 100 countries that are against a certain human right violation that Israel's doing, and they want the International Criminal Court to investigate, and the United States walks in with their cape and says, nope, we're vetoing that. Israel, go back and doing whatever you want, honey. You're okay. Don't worry about it. Go keep testing those billions of dollars of weapons on Palestinians.
They've got the license.
Yeah, they bought the license from the States. And what was that?
The Taliban are wondering from where to get such license to kill people.
I think they're applying. Like, everyone has to apply and then get accepted by the United States to get into the funding, right? The funding program. But that's a joke, by the way, for anyone. Or is it? Who knows these days? Everything is a joke right now. Nothing is real. What is happening, right? International law is not being respected. Human rights is not being respected. Like, what are we doing here? But yeah, so that's the unfortunate problem. Like, we hear a lot about, not many, who's really still aware of the Palestinian issue? Meanwhile, when the bombing of Gaza was happening during Ramadan and towards Eid, millions of people were protesting in their cities, in their towns, all over the world, from North America to South America, to Eastern Asia, to Central Asia, to Middle Eastern Asia, to Africa, to Southeast Asia. Millions of people, rallies from thousands to tens of thousands, were rallying, but they were not being covered by the mainstream media. And that is the problem. And that becomes, and that kind of feeds into all of this. So I think a lot of not-for-profits or a lot of NGOs do actually try to help, but it's just that I guess it depends on who they're trying to help. From my experiences as I was at West Bank, and the ease of getting supplies to the people who need it. And the second thing is, at the end of the day, we're putting all this pressure on not-for-profits and just the lay people like ourselves to just give a voice and try to help people in need. Meanwhile, the only people that can really do anything are politicians and government that are voting for bills, voting for policies that further fund Israel, further fund the Iron Dome, and they're funding the oppression, the ethnic cleansing, and genocide of Palestinians, and by extension, all these people being put in prison, including under administrative detention, man, woman, and children, not just adults. And these politicians are just funding those oppressive regimes and policies, unfortunately. So,
mostly these atrocities are done during the Ramadan. I think you have noticed this. So during Ramadan, they attack the Palestinians, and somewhere in Libya, somewhere in Syria, or in Afghanistan. So it's like a lot of, sorry to say this, but many of the corrupted NGOs are ready to encash this situation. So everything is political. Like most of the NGOs who collect the funds on the name of Palestine or Rohingya or any other place, they actually like get an opportunity to collect their funds. So it's all just a vanity show, and nothing works. So there are very rare people, rare NGOs or activists who are working for the cause. So the main thing is we have to focus like on creating awareness about such things on social media and using the other means. And thanks to the Core Middle East, and I've seen their posts and they have seen their articles. So such things need to be flooded online, the articles. That is the only way we can do something better for them.
I was just thinking about your question, and that there's kind of two ways to take it. Are we talking about the intervention of NGOs, which, as has been pointed out, can get blocked, or even government support can get blocked, if it's trying to get to Gaza. But then there's also the issue of intervention on a political stage and from the powers that be, and so say, for example, in South Africa, that is what it took. It took sanctions from the UN to break that apartheid system, right? And that is what people were willing to do. Well, Israel and apartheid South Africa are not so different. And so I'm going to say something that is a risky thing to say, and it's an unpopular thing to say, but having been there and myself, and having seen a lot of things, and as well having listened to Israeli journalists like Gideon Levy talk, he is an Israeli, right? He's a Jewish Israeli, talking about the values and attitudes of his own society, and the attitudes that allow this to continue on, that have propped it up from within Israel. So essentially, what I see the difference between apartheid South Africa and Israel is that they are using the threat of anti-Semitism against anyone who would stand up and say anything. And something that Gideon Levy said, which really struck me, and I was so grateful that he said it, being an Israeli. Not that his voice should be more important than anyone else's voice. It shouldn't be more important than Palestinians' voices. However, it does strike a chord with many people when someone who is Israeli says something like that, when it comes from inside the culture, and there's many people that are saying these same things, is that the memory of the Holocaust, which was a horrific world event, no doubt, a genocide of epic proportion, but it is being used as a way to almost like a tool. It's being used as
to justify, basically,
as a justification. Thank you for
yeah.
giving me the word. As an excuse or justification for the ongoing behaviors and policies of the Israeli government and what's been happening the entire time in Israel. And I think that the truth is that many countries around the world are not willing to stand up and say, listen, you can't do this anymore, because they're afraid of that. They're afraid of being called anti-Semitic. They're afraid of being called sort of like Holocaust deniers or whatever it is. Right. And that is something that is holding people back. And I believe it's something that is even holding it back at the UN level from moving forward, not to mention the fact that, you know, the United States has veto power, which is insane to me. I'm sorry, I don't think any country should have veto power. That's my opinion. And certainly not the US, that's for sure. You know, so these are some of the factors that I believe are in play as to why there is not, for example, sanctions at the highest level of the international community being placed against Israel as it was with South Africa. I mean, the human rights violations that are happening in those two places are the ones in Israel are not lesser than what was happening in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa. So I don't see why, other than that issue of anti-Semitism, that somehow we're not allowed, because to me, those things don't correlate, right? I am talking about the policies of a government, right? That has nothing to do with anti-Semitism whatsoever. But I think that is a huge factor that is hindering the forward movement of sanctions at an international level, as such that
I would like to add something to that. Actually, right in May, when I was also heavily involved in what was going on, there were a couple of articles from DW, Deutsche Welle, where there were Germans who are currently in power, who actually were defending what Israel was doing by saying, oh, Israel is not attacking, but what would they do if somebody is trying to attack them? It is a defensive mechanism, or like they're just trying to defend their people.
Yeah, one more point I would like to add with it.
Yeah.
Like, there are also some political benefits. Like, Israel has such a very intelligent political situations has created. Like, even to any country which goes against Israel has to think twice, because there are some political benefits that country is going to get from Israel or from America or from UN. So the main key is in the hands of Israel. So people will feel, most of the government, they don't come forward because they have got some interest, some political interest within there.
So we all know that there are all sorts of prisoners, from children to women, pregnant women, male, and we feel like almost half the population is in prison. But even though we can call the other half, let's say, lucky, they're still somehow trapped in the country. So do you think that the prisoner issue is some sort of a metaphor or a representation of what is actually happening in the country on a daily basis? Like, everybody in Palestine is actually in prison, even if they're not in prison.
The whole country is itself a prison. So even if something, any humanitarian aid which is coming through governments or NGOs or any like even the UN, So it has to go through Israel. And the only basic thing what the Israel is providing to the Palestine is the power. And whenever there are some protests or something, some disturbance from the Palestinian side, they are going to cut off the power also. So no basic like things are given to these people, including water and power. These are all under the control of Israel. So the whole Palestine is itself a prison.
I very much agree with that. What Mansoor said is very accurate. But then what about the freer Palestinians in the West Bank, for example? Those are also either have already been to prison at some point under administrative detention or anything else and luckily released, are currently in prison and being detained indefinitely, or will in some point in the future go to jail or prison and be detained for any reason. Like Jane said, gatherings of over 10 people, 10 or more. That's enough. That's enough motive. There you go. You're probably plotting our demise. Everybody goes in, and every 6 months we're going to renew it. And how about people who are not going to go to prison? Okay, they're not going to get detained. But what other prison are they living in? Well, they're living in their homes, let's say in East Jerusalem, which according to international law belongs to Palestinians. Israel comes in and says, hey, we're going to take your home and we're going to give it to someone who just came here from New Jersey. What? And not only that, they're going to take your home. It's theirs now. But you can appeal this at the Israeli Supreme Court. But wait, but who made this decision? Oh, the Israeli Supreme Court. So the Israeli Supreme Court is making the decision to give my home to some American who's never been to Palestine, but is claiming it based on being Jewish. And to appeal this, I have to go to the same person who's taking my home, which is the Israeli Supreme Court? This is like a circular reference in Excel. The formula is not right. Something ain't right here. And then just to make things even more exciting, the Supreme Court eventually said, you know what, guys, okay, Palestinians, we hear your complaints. How about this? Here's a compromise. Pay rent to the settler who took your home. Now it's absolutely ridiculous. So even people who aren't being arrested, they're getting ethnically displaced. So now they're homeless. Some people, they have to destroy their own homes with their own hands. The government issues an order and says, we're going to build a Jewish theme park for the settlers that live in this area. Your home is on that land. Either you destroy your own home with your own hands, or we are going to get a company to destroy it for you and flip you the bill. So if you're not being taken to prison, you're being left homeless or in a constant fight with settler colonialists. So it's just goes from bad to worse at the end of the day. So the question about, is everyone in a prison more or less? Unfortunately, yes. And everyone is living under the threat of always being taken to prison. So even people being displaced from their homes, if you decide, you know what, I'm not leaving. Oh, now you're standing up again. You're a threat to a settler. You're a threat to the Israeli state. Welcome to prison. 6 months. We'll see you in 6 months when we renew your detention. So no one is safe, unfortunately. And just to further add one more point, these administrative detentions are actually weaponized. They're tools of intimidation. So when it comes to children being detained, for example, we know that house raids happen very often. House raids whereby Israeli soldiers in the middle of the night will break down the door, barge in, beat up a bunch of people in the house, and they will destroy the house for no reason. They'll just say, we're looking for something. That's enough. That's if they give you a reason. And this has been documented on videos all over social media. This is not anything that's negotiable, right? It's not anything that's controversial. It's out there. But what they also do is, if a family is known for being vocal, a family is known for being loud and vocal against the oppressive policies and the oppression of Israel, what they will do is they will either kidnap, let's say, the father and take him into administrative detention, or even worse, as with the Bernat brothers, they kidnap the children.
Every day, like, you cannot expect anything out of the Israeli administration. Like, even they may take your home tomorrow, or the same day they may take your kid, they may kill your women or arrest them. Any woman, like old women or pregnant women. Means everything is unpredictable for the families of Palestine inside who are living in Palestine. Even their crops are burned. Their crops are burned. So anything is expected. Means every day there is a
Yeah,
new circumstance.
they lost their hospitals, their healthcare facility does not exist. They had 296 attacks on like education centers. They don't have anything left. There's no lifestyle. It's like way behind when we were cavemen, or even before that. At least cavemen had caves to live in, and these people don't. So it is terrifying. It's not even terror, it's worse than terror, I would say. The hunger strike, I think, has played a very vital role in coming out to the world as to what they're going through, because it was always something which is there in the back of our minds and never something that we thought about talking. And I think that it is, or rather, I hope that in the near future we come to a conclusion where there is not so much of human rights violation that it kind of hurts us emotionally, for all the prisoners, and not even the prisoners, but rather everybody living in that area.
I can wrap up with some quick final words. And my final words would be, when people ask, so what now? What are you do? What can we as the layperson even do at this point? Does anything even matter? Does what we do even matter? And what I would say is, don't ask me, don't ask Jane, don't ask Mansour, ask the Palestinians living in Palestine, or whatever's left of Palestine. People like Muhammad al-Kurd and Muna al-Kurd, who have been vital in educating the world about what's happening in places like Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. And they are saying that yes, it does make a difference in changing the narrative. And if they say yes, us sharing about it, making videos about it, writing about it, signing petitions, and doing all of that makes a difference, then that's enough for me. That should be enough for us to keep doing what we're doing.
I do agree with Muhammad that earlier also I said the same thing. By creating awareness campaigns through social media and creating small websites and blogs, this will this can only be helpful for like the cause of the Palestinian people. And as you said about the hunger strike, and it's when the hunger strike is on peak, I hope it won't be ended with force feeding, because earlier also the same thing happened. Prisoners, when they were on a hunger strike, they were treated like forcefully treated. So that's what like expecting this time also. It will end up with a force feeding, something like that. So that's what we can do, being like from an individual perspective. Like what we can do is we can just create awareness and educate people about the atrocities of Israel and the lives of Palestinians. So that's what I can say. Thank you.